He divorced me for his young secretary. Convinced he was upgrading, I quietly relocated to a remote coastal town, guarding a secret he never knew at their extravagant wedding. A guest casually dropped a remark that drained the blood from his face and caused him to trash the reception. From that moment, his life plummeted while mine flourished. This is not a story of revenge. It is his self-destruction ignited by one sentence spoken in front of hundreds. My name is Tessa Monroe, and I was 34 years old when I sat down to the last dinner I would ever share with my husband. The venue was the Ironwood Grill, a dimly lit velvet-draped establishment in downtown Chicago, where the air always smelled of truffle oil and expensive cologne. It was the kind of place where people whispered not out of politeness, but because the secrets being traded at these tables were worth more than the food. I arrived 15 minutes early. I requested table 42. The hostess, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, who likely smelled the divorce on me like cheap perfume, led me to the corner booth without a word. This was the same table where Derek had taken me 8 years ago. That night, his hands had trembled so violently that he nearly dropped the velvet ring box into his French onion soup. He had looked at me with a reverence that made me feel like the only source of light in the room. Now, 8 years later, the same jazz track seemed to be playing on a loop, but everything else had rotted from the inside out. I ordered a glass of Pinot Noir and stared at the empty leather seat opposite me. The leather was cracked. I wondered if it had been cracked back then or if I just had not noticed. Derek Cole arrived 20 minutes late. He swept into the restaurant with the frantic energy of a man who believes his time is the most expensive currency in the world. He was wearing the charcoal suit I had picked out for him last Christmas, the one with the subtle pinstripes that made his shoulders look broader than they actually were. His shirt was crisp and white, unbuttoned at the collar just enough to suggest casual power. He looked handsome. He looked successful. He looked like a stranger. He did not apologize. He slid into the booth, his eyes glued to the glowing screen of his phone. A small involuntary smile played on his lips as his thumbs flew across the glass. I knew that smile. It used to be mine. Now it belonged to Leonard Brooks, the 24-year-old executive assistant who had decided that my husband was the missing piece to her corporate ladder climb. TFR was a nightmare on the loop, Derek said, finally placing the phone on the table face up. He did not look at me. He signaled the waiter with a sharp flick of his hand. I'll have the ribeye, medium rare, and bring another glass of whatever she is drinking. I am drinking to an ending. Derek, I said softly. He finally looked at me, blinking as if surprised to find I was actually there and not just a placeholder in his calendar. His eyes were clear, unburdened by guilt. That was the thing about Derek lately. He had rewritten our history in his head so thoroughly that he truly believed he was the victim of a passionless marriage rather than the arsonist who had burned it down. Let us not make this dramatic, Tesser, he sighed, unfolding his napkin. We agreed to keep this civil. The lawyers have the papers ready. This is just a formality, a closing ceremony. A closing ceremony, I repeated. The words tasted like ash. The waiter arrived with our steaks. The meat was seared perfectly, juices running red onto the white porcelain. Derek cut into his with surgical precision. I watched his hands, strong, manicured hands. I remembered how those hands felt when he held me after my mother died. I remembered how they felt when we painted our first apartment, covered in eggshell white paint and laughing until our sides itched. Now he held his knife like a weapon. He was eager to clean. His phone buzzed, a message from Lana. The screen lit up with a heart emoji. He glanced at it, and the softness returned to his face before he masked it with a cough. So, he said, chewing thoughtfully, what is your plan? You are keeping the apartment for a few more months. I assume the market is decent if you want to sell. I took a sip of wine. It was bitter. Or maybe that was just the bile rising in my throat. I am leaving Chicago, Derek. I am moving to Harbor Ridge. Derek paused, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. He frowned, trying to place the name. Harbor Ridge. That tiny town on the coast where your grandmother lived. The one with the spotty self-service and the smell of dead fish. It smells of salt and pine. I corrected him, my voice steady. And yes, Grandma Nora left me her cottage. I am moving there after the court date. I am starting over. He actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. You living in a drafty old cottage in the middle of nowhere. Tesser, be serious. You are a city girl. You need your overpriced lattes and your designed showrooms. You will last 2 months tops. I think you will find I am more resilient than you give me credit for, I said. He shrugged, dismissing my entire future with a roll of his shoulders. Well, if that is what you want, it is probably for the best. A quiet life suits you. You always get overwhelmed easily. The insult was casual, wrapped in fake concern. I thought about the last 3 years. I thought about the nights I stayed up until 3:00 in the morning finishing freelance design projects to pay the extra principal on our mortgage because Derek wanted to lease a luxury car we could not afford. I thought about the times he came home smelling of perfume that was not mine, claiming he had been entertaining clients until midnight. I realized now that I had been subsidizing his affair. I had worked myself to the bone to build a life comfortable enough for him to feel confident leaving it. I am happy for you, really, Derek continued, wiping his mouth. Speaking of fresh starts, Lorna and I have decided on a date. We are booking Setterline Manor for the ceremony next spring. The air left my lungs. Setterling Manor was the most exclusive, exorbitant venue in the state. It was the place I had jokingly pointed out to him years ago, only for him to tell me we needed to be realistic about our budget. Setterine, I said, keeping my face blank. That is ambitious. It is a statement, Derek said, his chest puffing out slightly. Lorna deserves the best, and frankly, so do I. It is time I stopped playing small. This wedding is going to be the launch pad for the next phase of my career. A real power move. We are inviting everyone, the partners, the investors. It has to be perfect. He was speaking about his wedding to his mistress as if it were a corporate merger. He was looking at me, his wife of 8 years, and discussing the floral arrangements for the woman who had wrecked our home. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. But it was not a loud snap. It was not a scream, or a sob, or a plate thrown against the wall. It was the quiet, definitive click of a door locking. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he was small. He was a man who defined his worth by the reflection in other people's eyes. He was hollow. He was chasing a mirage of status, believing that a younger wife in a more expensive venue would make him a king. He had no idea that the foundation he was standing on was made of sand. I thought about the house in Harbor Ridge. I thought about the wind coming off the Pacific. I thought about solitude. It did not feel like a punishment anymore. It felt like a detox. I hope it is everything you want, Derek, I said. And for the first time in a year, I wasn't lying. I hoped he got exactly the life he was purchasing. He checked his watch, then glanced at his phone again. Look, I have to run. Lorna is waiting for me to look at color swatches for the linens. You know how it is. I do, I said. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He threw a credit card onto the table. Dinner is on me. Consider it a parting gift. Good luck in whatever that town is called. Send me a postcard if you don't freeze to death. He turned and walked away. He did not look back. He strode through the restaurant, weaving between the tables, nodding to a few people he wanted to impress, and stepped out into the Chicago night. I sat there alone. The noise of the restaurant rushed back in to fill the silence he left behind. The clatter of forks, the laughter of a couple in the corner, the hiss of the espresso machine. I looked at the steak I had not touched. I looked at the glass of wine. For months, I had been terrified of this moment. I had been terrified of being the woman sitting alone in a restaurant, the discarded first wife. I thought I would feel humiliated. I thought I would want to crawl under the table and die. But as I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of truffles and old leather, I realized my hands were steady, my heart was beating at a normal rhythm. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for 2 years was gone. He was gone. His judgment, his spending, his lies, his gaslighting, it had all walked out the door with him. I signaled the waiter. Take this away, please, I said, gesturing to the untouched food, and bring me the check. I will pay for my own meal. Sir left his card, the waiter said gently. I know, I said, pulling out my own wallet, but I prefer not to owe him anything, not even a steak. I paid the bill. I tipped 30%, and then I walked out of the Ironwood Grill into the cool autumn air, ready to drive home and pack the first box. I was not just moving to a different zip code. I was moving to a different life. Derek believed he had won. He believed he was the protagonist of this story, and I was just a footnote he had edited out. He was wrong. The story was just beginning, and as I hailed a cab, watching the city lights blur in the rain, I knew one thing for certain. Derek Cole had no idea what he had just lost, and he had no idea what was coming for him. But I did, and the silence I carried with me was not emptiness. It was calm before the storm. The hallways of the Cook County Courthouse were designed to make you feel small. The ceilings were too high. The marble floors echoed with the sharp clicks of heels and the heavy thuds of briefcases, and the air was perpetually conditioned to a temperature that I could only describe as bureaucratic zero. It was a cold that seeped through your clothes and settled into your bones, reminding you that here, love was not an emotion. Here, love was a contract that was being terminated for breach of terms. I had dressed for the occasion with the meticulous care of a soldier putting on armor. I wore a simple black sheath dress, high-necked and long-sleeved, with zero jewelry, no earrings, no necklace, and certainly no rings. I had scrubbed my face clean of everything but a little moisturizer and a touch of mascara. I refused to look like a victim. I refused to be the weeping discarded wife with puffy eyes and a crumpled tissue in her hand. I wanted to look like a blank slate. Derek predictably had dressed for a photo op. He strode down the corridor 10 minutes late, flanked by his attorney. He was wearing a navy Italian silk suit that shimmered slightly under the fluorescent lights, a silk tie the color of crushed berries, and a watch that cost more than the car I was currently driving. He looked vibrant. He looked like a man who had just closed a massive deal, which in his mind, I suppose he had. He was also on the phone. Of course, he was on the phone. As he approached the bench outside the courtroom where I sat waiting, I could hear his voice. It was dropped an octave lower than usual, that sultry, intimate tone he used to reserve for me on our anniversaries. "Do not worry, babe," he was saying, ignoring his lawyer who was trying to hand him a file. "I told the florist that white hydrangeas are non-negotiable. If they cannot source them, we will fly them in. Yes, I love you, too. Yes." Soon, he hung up and slid the phone into his pocket, finally acknowledging my presence with a curt nod. There was no shame in his eyes. There was only the impatience of a man double-parked in a loading zone. "Tesser," he said. "Derek," I replied. We walked into the courtroom like two strangers who had accidentally shared an elevator. The proceedings were brutally short. 8 years of marriage, the Sunday mornings making pancakes, the arguments over paint colors, the grief when we lost his father, the warmth of his back against mine in the winter, all of it was reduced to a stack of manila folders on a judge's desk. The judge was a virile-looking woman who had clearly seen 1,000 Dirks and 1,000 Tessers. She peered at us over her spectacles. "Have both parties reviewed the settlement agreement?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Derek's lawyer said smoothly. "Yes," I said, "and you both understand that this decree is final, that upon signing, the marital union is dissolved." Derek did not even look at me. He looked at the clock on the wall. "Yes," he said. "Yes," I repeated. It was terrifying how easy it was. It should have been harder. The floor should have cracked open. Lightning should have struck the building. But nothing happened. The stenographer kept typing. The clerk stamped a document. The gavel made a dull wooden thud. We were done. Outside the courtroom, Derek seemed to physically inflate. He loosened his tie slightly, a look of immense relief washing over him. He turned to me, and for a second, I thought he might say something sentimental. I thought he might say he was sorry it ended this way or that he wished me well. Instead, he gestured vaguely to the file in his hand. "I am glad we did not drag this out," he said. "The division of assets was fair. You get the Honda and the furniture in the guest room. Honestly, Tesser, I just want you to be comfortable. I know you do not have much of a safety net." I looked at him. He truly believed he was being benevolent. He was letting me keep a 6-year-old car and a bedroom set because he felt sorry for me. He thought he was stripping me of the valuable things, his status, his income, his future, and tossing me crumbs to keep me from starving. Thank you, Derek, I said, my voice flat. I will manage. Right, he said, already turning away. His phone was buzzing again. He pulled it out and his face lit up. It is Lana. I have to take this. We are finalizing the menu for the reception at Sutherland Manor. 300 guests. Can you believe it? It is going to be the event of the season. He was boasting about his wedding to his mistress, to his ex-wife of 5 minutes. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Goodbye, Derek, I said. He did not hear me. He was already walking away, his phone pressed to his ear. Hey, beautiful. Yes, I am a free man. Let us celebrate. Champagne at the Palmer House. I am on my way. I watched him disappear around the corner. He did not look back once. He did not check to see if I was okay. He simply erased me. I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding Chicago sunlight. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, clutching the folder that contained my divorce decree. It was just a few sheets of paper. It felt incredibly light. For a long time, I had feared this paper. I thought it would be a death certificate for my life. But standing there, listening to the roar of the traffic and feeling the wind off the lake, I realized it was not a death certificate. It was a pardon. I took a deep breath, hailed a cab, and gave the driver the address for Union Station. The train station was a chaotic symphony of departures and arrivals. People were rushing everywhere, dragging suitcases, hugging loved ones, chasing time. I found Meyer standing near the entrance to Track 7. She looked like a beacon of colorful sanity in a gray world, wearing a bright yellow scarf and holding a canvas tote bag that looked heavy. When she saw me, she did not ask how it went. She knew. She simply pulled me into a hug that squeezed the air out of my lungs. Meyer smelled of vanilla and fierce loyalty. You did it, she whispered into my hair. You are free. I am free, I echoed, and this time the words felt real. She pulled back and shoved the heavy tote bag into my hands. Okay, listen to me. I packed the essentials. There are 2 bottles of that Cabernet you like, the one from Narper. There is a block of aged cheddar, some artisan crackers, and a bag of those dark chocolate truffles. Also, I put on a fuzzy blanket because train air conditioning is unpredictable. You are the best person alive, I said, managing a weak smile. I know, she said, her eyes misting over slightly. Call me when you get to the coast. I mean it, Tesser. Every day if you have to, if you get lonely, if you get scared, if you just want to scream about how much of a cliché Derek is, you call me. I will. Boarding for the Empire Builder to Seattle and Portland is now beginning. The announcer's voice boomed overhead. I hugged her one last time, grabbed my suitcase in the survival bag, and walked toward the train. I did not look back at the city skyline. I did not look back at the skyscrapers where Derek was likely popping a cork on a bottle of Dom Perignon. I stepped onto the train and found my seat. The cabin was quiet. I had booked a sleeper car, needing privacy. As the train lurched forward and began to crawl out of the station, the sun was beginning to set. The concrete jumble of Chicago slowly gave way to the industrial outskirts and then eventually to the dark open fields of the Midwest. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Mr. Henderson, my grandmother's family attorney. He was an old-fashioned man who believed in voice calls over emails. Hello, Mr. Henderson, I answered. Tesser, my dear. His growly voice came through the line. I trust you are underway. I am. The train just left the station. But I wanted to catch you before you lost signal in the mountains. I have finished reviewing the final details of Nora's estate with the trustees. Is everything okay with the house? I asked, a sudden panic gripping me. Derek knows about the house. He thinks it is just a shack, but he knows it exists. The house is fine, Tesser, Mr. Henderson assured me. But that is not why I'm calling. There is another component to the inheritance that we need to discuss. Your grandmother was a very private woman, and she was also very astute. She knew about the troubles in your marriage long before you admitted them to yourself. I frowned, pressing the phone closer to my ear. What do you mean? Nora set up a trust. Mr. Henderson said slowly. A significant one. She liquidated several of her early investments in technology stocks back in the 90s. She did not want you to have access to it while you were married to Mr. Poe. The terms were specific. The funds were to be released only in the event of your divorce or upon her death if you were already single. Since the divorce decree was signed today, the trust is now active. I sat up straighter, the rhythmic clacking of the train wheels fading into the background. A trust? How much are we talking about, Mr. Henderson? After taxes and fees, he said, the current valuation sits at roughly $2,400,000. I stopped breathing. The number hung in the air, heavy and impossible. $2 million. $22 million, I stammered. And $400,000. He corrected gently. It is entirely yours, Tesser. It is protected, Mr. Cole has no claim to it. He signed away all rights to any future assets or inheritances in the settlement today. He walked away from a fortune because he was too busy looking at his new girlfriend. I closed my eyes. Tears pricked at the corners, hot and fast. Grandma Nora, even from beyond the grave, she was looking out for me. She had known. She had known Derek was a taker, and she had ensured he would never take this. Tesser, Mr. Henderson asked, are you there? I am here, I whispered. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Thank you. I will have the paperwork waiting for you in Harbor Ridge. Safe travels. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand. Derek thought I was destitute. He thought I was retreating to a hoo with my tail between my legs, clutching a used car and some old furniture. He was celebrating his victory right now, laughing about how cheap it was to get rid of me. I could call him. I could text him and tell him that I was a millionaire. I could ruin his night. I could make him choke on his champagne. But then I looked out the window. The train was picking up speed, cutting through the night like a silver bullet. The darkness outside was absolute peaceful. If I told him, he would find a way to make it ugly. He would sue. He would harass me. He would try to guilt me into giving him a share. He would stay in my life. The only way to be truly free was to let him believe he had won. Let him think I was nothing. Let him think I was weak and poor and broken. I looked at my phone one last time. It was the last tether to my life in Chicago. The number was stored in his contacts. The cloud data was linked to our old shared accounts. I popped the back of the phone case off. I took the small metal pin I kept on my keychain and ejected the SIM card tray. The tiny chip sat there holding 8 years of memories, text messages, photos, and contacts. I took the chip between my thumb and forefinger. It was hard plastic, but with enough pressure it bent. I pressed harder until I felt it snap. I slid the window of the sleeper car down just a crack. The wind roared, cold and wild. I tossed the broken pieces of the SIM card out into the rushing darkness. They vanished instantly, swallowed by the night and the miles of empty fields. I sat back against the seat and wrapped Meyer's fuzzy blanket around my shoulders. I opened the bottle of Cabernet and poured myself a glass in a paper cup. The train rushed onward, carrying me away from the man who thought he had discarded me and toward a future he could not even begin to imagine. I took a sip of wine. It tasted like grapes, oak, an absolute terrifying freedom. I was Tessa Monroe. I was alone. I was rich. And for the first time in my life, I belonged entirely to myself. Harbor Ridge did not just look different from Chicago. It vibrated at a completely different frequency. If the city was a constant, high-pitched scream of sirens and jackhammers, this town was a low, steady hum of cello strings. I stepped off the local connector bus, dragging my 2 suitcases onto the gravel path. The air here was heavy, but not with humidity or exhaust fumes. It was heavy with salt, moisture, and the sharp, clean scent of pine needles baking in the sun. The town itself seemed to be carved out of the landscape rather than built on top of it. The buildings were mostly timber, weathered to a soft gray by years of coastal winds, with peeling white trim and flower boxes overflowing with geraniums. There were no skyscrapers blocking the sky. There was just an endless expanse of blue that stretched out until it met the darker, churning blue of the Pacific Ocean. I took a cab, a rusted yellow sedan, driven by a man who introduced himself as Old Pete, to the address Mr. Henderson had given me when the car crunched to a halt at the end of a long dirt driveway. My breath hitched. Grandma Nora's cottage. It was exactly as I remembered it from the summers of my childhood, yet somehow smaller and grander all at once. It was a 2-story structure with a shingled roof that sloped down like a protective wing. The paint was a faded sage green, blending perfectly with the dune grass surrounding it. But it was the garden that stole the air from my lungs. It was wild, overgrown, and utterly magnificent. Bushes of wild roses, their thorns sharp, and their petals exploding in shades of crimson and pink, wrestled for space with tall stalks of lavender that swayed in the breeze. "That will be $1.15 even," old Pete said. I paid him and added a $1.05 tip as he drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. The silence of the place descended on me. It was not a lonely silence. It was an expected one. I walked up the porch steps, the wood groaning softly under my boots. I found the key under the ceramic frog statue, just where Mr. Henderson said it would be. The lock turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk. Inside, the air was still and smelled of beeswax, old paper, and the sea. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon sunlight that pierced through the lace curtains. I dropped my bags in the hallway and walked into the living room. Everything was frozen in time. The overstuffed floral armchair sat facing the bay window, positioned perfectly to watch the waves crash against the jagged rocks below. The grand mahogany bookshelf was still stuffed with her collection of botanical encyclopedias and romance novels. For the first time in 8 years, I did not feel the need to check my phone. I did not feel the phantom vibration of a text message from Derek asking where his dry cleaning was, or a notification about a dinner party I had to host. I sank into the floral armchair. The fabric was rough against my cheek. I closed my eyes and listened. Whoosh, crash, whoosh, crash. The ocean was the only clock that mattered here. I realized then that this was not just a house. It was a fortress. It was the first piece of territory in my adult life that was entirely, undeniably mine. My solitude was interrupted an hour later by a heavy, rhythmic knocking on the front door. I opened it to find a man who looked like he had been carved out of driftwood. He was huge, with a white beard that reached his chest and skin that was tanned to the color of old leather. He was wearing yellow fishing waders and holding a wicker basket that smelled intensely of the ocean. "You must be little Tesser," he boomed, his voice growly and warm. "I am Tesser," I said, smiling despite my surprise. "I am not sure about little anymore, though," he laughed, a sound that seemed to come from his belly. "I am Hank. I live in the blue house down the road. Your grandma and we used to trade my fresh catch for her tomato jam. Figured you might need some dinner since you just got in. The store closes at 5:00. He thrusts the basket into my hands. Inside lay 2 beautiful silver-skinned fish on a bed of ice. "Thank you, Hank. This is incredibly kind," I said, genuinely touched. Hank leaned against the door frame, crossing his thick arms. He looked me up and down, his eyes crinkling at the corners. They were sharp eyes, observant. "Nora told me you would come back eventually," he said. I paused, clutching the basket. "She did." "Yeah," Hank nodded. "About a week before she passed. She was sitting right there on that porch. She told me, 'Hank, keep an eye on the place. My granddaughter is going to need a sanctuary when she finally gets tired of those city men who do not know a flounder from a fluke.'" My throat tightened. She said that. Her exact words. Hank winked. "She said you had a good heart, but you were trying to plant it in concrete. Said you would need to come back to the soil to bloom again." He tipped his cap, turned, and marched back down the steps. "Holler if you need help with the roof. It leaks when the wind blows from the east." I closed the door and leaned against it, pressing the cool wood against my back. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of relief. Grandma Nora had seen me, even when I was lost in the dazzle of Derek's world. She had kept a light on for me here. The next 3 days were a blur of physical labor, and I loved every second of it. I did not hire a cleaning crew. I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to scrub away the dust of the past. I tied my hair up in a messy bun, put on an old t-shirt, and went to work. I polished the hardwood floors until they glowed like honey. I washed the windows until the view of the ocean was crystal clear. I spent hours in the garden, wearing thick gloves, hacking away the dead branches of the rose bushes. Every thorn that scratched my arm felt like a penance, and every weed I pulled felt like I was uprooting a bad memory. I found a photograph of myself and Derek on the mantelpiece. It was from our honeymoon. We looked happy, or at least we looked like we were posing for a magazine cover. I stared at it for a long moment. Then calmly, I took the photo out of the frame. I did not rip it. I did not burn it. I simply slid it into a drawer in the kitchen where the junk mail went. Then I replaced it with a picture of Grandma Nora standing in her garden, laughing with her head thrown back. I was not just renovating a house. I was excavating myself. By the fourth evening, the house was breathing again. The smell of lemon polish and fresh lavender filled the rooms. I showered, washed the dirt and sweat from my skin, and put on a comfortable linen dress. I walked out to the back porch as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and orange. I remembered the bag Meyer had given me. I went to the kitchen and popped the cork on the Narper Cabernet. I poured a generous glass and took it outside. In Chicago, this time of night would be peak chaos. Derek would be coming home stressed, complaining about traffic, demanding a drink, filling the space with his anxious energy. I would be walking on eggshells, trying to gauge his mood so I could match it. Here, there was only the wind. I sat in the rocking chair and took a sip of the wine. It was rich and velvety. I watched the first star appear in the darkening sky. "Here is to you, Nora," I whispered, raising the glass to the garden. For the first time, I let myself think about the future. Not the next hour or the next day, but the years ahead. I tried to picture it, and for the first time, the image was not blurry. I saw myself drinking coffee in this garden. I saw myself drawing sketches at the big oak dining table. I saw myself walking on the beach in the rain. And in none of those images was there a man in a suit checking his watch. The realization made me elated. I was not afraid of being alone. I was exhilarated by it. The next morning, I woke up with the sun. The light streaming into my bedroom was not the harsh glare of the city. It was soft and diffuse. I made a pot of strong coffee and set up my laptop on the dining table. It was time to face reality. I had the trust fund. Yes, but I was 34 years old. I was not ready to retire. I wanted to create. I wanted to build. But I knew one thing for certain. I was done with the high-pressure, soulless corporate design world that Derek had pushed me into. I did not want to design penthouses for men who never slept in them. I wanted to design homes. I opened my portfolio. I looked at the projects I had highlighted before: sleek glass offices, minimalist lobbies, cold chrome kitchens. They were technically perfect, but they felt dead. I scrolled down to the bottom of my files, to a folder I had named Passion Projects. These were the things I had done for friends or just for myself: a cozy reading nook renovation, a sunroom filled with plants, a rustic kitchen remodel for Meyer's sister. These spaces had warmth. They had texture. I updated my CV. I deleted the pretentious summary about synergy and maximizing spatial efficiency. Instead, I wrote interior designer focused on organic materials, natural light, and creating spaces that nurture the human spirit. I opened the search engine and typed in interior design studios Harbor Ridge. Most of the results were generic construction companies or furniture stores, but on the second page of results, I found something interesting: Aurora Nest Studio. The website was simple, elegant. The photos showed local projects: a renovated boathouse turned into a library, a bakery with warm accents, a family home that looked lived in and loved. Their philosophy page had just one sentence: "We believe a room should tell the story of the people who live in it." It was perfect. It was small. It was local. It was hiding in plain sight. I drafted an email. I did not use the corporate jargon I had been trained to speak. I wrote from the heart. I told them I had just moved to town, that I was looking to reconnect with the roots of design, and that I admired their work on the boathouse project. I attached my passion projects portfolio, leaving out the big corporate towers entirely. I hit send. I expected to wait a week, maybe two. Small studios were notoriously slow at administrative tasks. I stood up to refill my coffee cup before I could even cross the kitchen. My laptop pinged. I froze. I turned back to the screen. It was a reply from Grayson Elwood, the owner of Aurora Studio. "Dear Tesser, I was just looking at your portfolio. The way you utilize the natural light in that sunroom project is remarkable. It is rare to see someone who understands that shadows are just as important as the light itself. We are currently looking for a lead on a historic preservation project, and your aesthetic seems to align with what we need. Are you free to come by the studio this Friday at 10:00 in the morning? We are located just off the main pier above the bookstore. Best, Grayson. My heart did a strange little flip in my chest. It was not the heavy thud of anxiety I used to get when Derek emailed me. It was a flutter, a spark. I typed back a reply. Friday at 10 is perfect. I look forward to it. I closed the laptop and looked out at the ocean. A smile spread across my face, unbidden and uncontrollable. I had been in Harbor Ridge for less than a week. I had a house. I had a neighbor who brought me fish. And now I had an interview. I was not just surviving the wreckage of my marriage. I was building a boat, and I was getting ready to sail. Aurora Nest Studio was nothing like the glass coffins I was used to working in back in Chicago. There were no badge scanners, no sterile reception desks guarded by people who looked like they had not smiled since the turn of the century, and certainly no hum of fluorescent lights that gave you a headache by noon. The studio was located on the second floor of a refurbished brick building right on the edge of the marina, sitting comfortably above a dusty used bookstore that smelled of vanilla and old paper. To get to the entrance, I had to climb a wooden staircase on the side of the building, my hand trailing along a railing that was damp with the morning mist. When I pushed the door open, a bell chimed, a real brass bell, not an electronic buzzer. The space was flooded with light. The entire west wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, framing the harbor like a moving painting. Masts of sailboats bobbed in rhythm with the tide, and the morning sun turned the water into a sheet of hammered silver. Inside, drafting tables were scattered across a floor made of reclaimed barnwood. There were samples of fabric, tiles, and wood finishes piled on shelves, not in a chaotic way, but in a way that suggested creativity was actually happening here. "You must be Tesser," a voice said. I turned to see a man walking toward me from the back of the room. He was holding a mug of coffee in one hand and a roll of blueprints in the other. This was Grayson Elwood. He looked to be about 40 years old, with salt and pepper hair that was a little too long to be corporate, but short enough to be respectable. He wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, and his eyes were the kind of warm brown that made you feel instantly at ease. I said, extending my hand. "It is nice to meet you, Grayson." His handshake was firm, his palm rough, like someone who actually built things rather than just drawing them. "Uffy, the pot is fresh." "I would love some," I said. We sat at a round wooden table near the window. He did not open a laptop. He did not check his phone. He just set his mug down and looked at me. It was unnerving. In my old life, meetings were 90% distraction and 10% conversation. Grayson looked at me as if I were the only data point that mattered in the room. So he started, leaning back in his chair. "You traded the Windy City for our little fob bank. That is a serious change of pace. What brought you here?" I had rehearsed a professional answer. I had planned to talk about seeking new challenges and diversifying my portfolio, but looking at the way the sunlight hit the grain of the wooden table, the corporate script felt ridiculous. I needed to breathe, I said honestly. I spent 8 years designing pennies for people who treat their homes like museums. I realized I had forgotten how to design for humans, and I had a bit of a life reset. My grandmother left me her cottage here. It felt like a sign. Grayson nodded slowly. He did not pry. He did not ask about the life reset. He just seemed to understand the shorthand. "I get that. I worked in Seattle for a decade. Burned out. I came here to remember why I liked architecture in the first place. You cannot design a home if you do not know how to live in one." He pulled my portfolio toward him. I held my breath. I had stripped out the high-gloss skyscrapers. What remained were the smaller, intimate projects I had done on the side. He flipped past the kitchen renovation and stopped at a photo of a window seat I had designed for a friend's tiny apartment. It was nothing fancy, just a bench with built-in storage upholstered in a soft oatmeal linen framed by bookshelves. "This," Grayson said, tapping the page. "Tell me about this." I felt a phantom ache in my chest. I remembered showing that design to Derek. He had laughed and asked why I was wasting 3 days on a reading nook that added zero resale value to the property. Nobody cares about where they read a book. Tesser, he had said, they care about the granite countertops. It was a small corner. I told Grayson, my voice steady. The client had a stressful job. She needed a place where she could curl up and feel safe. I wanted to create a pocket of silence in a noisy room. Grayson looked up at me, a smile touching the corners of his eyes. A pocket of silence. That is it. That is the philosophy. Anyone can buy expensive furniture. It takes a designer to build a feeling. You have a good eye for the soul of a room. Tesser. The validation washed over me like warm water. He was not looking at the budget or the brand names. He was looking at the intent. We are about to start a massive project, Grayson said, closing the folder. The Silver Tides Inn, the big Victorian hotel on the cliff, the one with the turret. I asked. I thought it was abandoned. It was, he said. New investors just bought it. They want to restore it, not modernize it. Restore it. They want it to feel like it did in 1920, but with better plumbing. I need a lead designer who understands that old buildings have ghosts and quirks. I think that might be you. I blinked. You are offering me the job. I am, he said, unless you hate old hotels and the smell of sawdust. I love the smell of sawdust, I said, a grin breaking across my face. Good. Can you start Monday? And just like that, I was employed. There was no 3-round vetting process with HR, no personality tests, just 2 people agreeing that spaces should have souls. My life settled into a rhythm that felt like a favorite song I had forgotten the lyrics to. My mornings began at 7. I would walk down the hill from Grandma Noor's cottage, the morning air crisp enough to wake me up without caffeine. I would stop at the Daily Crumb, a bakery run by a woman named Sarah, who already knew my order, a dark roast with a splash of oat milk and a cinnamon twist. The walk to the studio took exactly 15 minutes. I walked past the fishermen, unloading crates of crab, past the post office where the flag snapped in the wind, and up the wooden stairs to Aurora Nest. Work was busy, but not frantic. We ate lunch together, Grayson, me, and the 2 junior draftsmen, Leo and Sam. We did not eat at our desks. We sat at the round table or went down to the pier and ate sandwiches while watching the ferries come in. We talked about structural beams and vintage wallpaper, but we also talked about books, the weather, and the best way to cook artichokes. I would leave at 5, not 6:00, not 7, not whenever the boss decided to go home. 5. I would go home, water the lavender, and sit on my porch. For the first time in my adult life, I was not waiting for anyone. I was not checking my phone to see if Derek was coming home for dinner or if he was delayed again. But the past has a way of knocking on the door, usually electronically. It was a Tuesday evening about 3 weeks after I started at the studio. I was sketching a concept for the lobby fireplace at the Silver Tides Inn when my iPad buzzed. A video call from Maya. I propped the tablet up against a bowl of fruit and hit answer. Maya's face filled the screen. She was in her bathroom in Chicago, aggressively blending contour onto her cheekbones. The background noise was a mix of traffic and a television blaring the news. Tell me you are drinking something alcoholic, Meyer said, by way of greeting. Herbal tea, I said, raising my mug. Wild, boring. I know. You are practically a monk, she teased, then leaned into the camera, her expression shifting to that gleeful look she got when she had information. Okay, sit down. Wait, you are sitting. Brace yourself. I have intel. On what? On the royal wedding, she said, rolling her eyes. Derek and Lana, it is getting out of control. Tesser, I ran into a friend who works at the catering company they hired. Apparently, Derek has upgraded the package again. I took a sip of tea. Upgraded how? They are flying in a string quartet from New York, Meyer said, applying mascara with dangerous precision. And get this. Lana decided she did not like the chairs at Cedar Manor, so they are renting 500 gold Chiavari chairs. 500. They only have 200 guests. Confirmed, but she said it needs to look full. And Derek, he is paying for all of it. He is putting down deposits like he is a monopoly man. I listened, but the familiar sting of jealousy did not come. In the past, hearing about Derek spending money on another woman would have made me feel inadequate. I would have wondered why I was not worth the gold chairs. Now, all I felt was a cold mathematical confusion. He cannot afford that, I said quietly. I managed our finances for 8 years. Meyer, Derek makes good money, but he spends it as fast as it comes in. He does not have the liquidity for a wedding like that. Not with the alimony settlements, which he isn't paying, by the way, because I waived them. But still, the mortgage on his condo alone is massive. That is what I said, Meyer exclaimed, capping her lipstick. But he is walking around town, acting like he just sold a tech startup. He is leasing a new Porsche. He is talking about buying a summer house in the Hamptons. It is Medek Tesser. It is like he is trying to prove something to the universe. He is trying to prove he won. I said he thinks if the wedding is expensive enough, it validates the affair. If it looks perfect, then what he did was right. Well, it is going to be a very expensive train wreck, Meyer said. Anyway, are you okay? Does hearing this make you want to throw the tea at the wall? I looked down at my sketch. The charcoal lines of the fireplace were strong and sure. I thought about the silver tides in, about the way the light hit the ocean in the morning, about the smell of cinnamon twists, and about the calm, steady presence of Grayson Elwood. I compared that to the frantic, deck-fueled circus Derek was building, a life of gold chairs and leased cars and constant exhausting performance. No, I said, and I realized I meant it. I do not want to throw anything. Honestly, Meyer, I just feel relieved. It is not my problem anymore. I do not have to balance the checkbook after he buys the gold chairs. Meyer grinned. That is the spirit. Okay, I have to run. I have a date with a guy who actually knows how to balance a checkbook. Love you. Love you too. The screen went black. I sat there for a moment in the silence of my cottage. Outside, the crickets were singing and the distant roar of the ocean provided a baseline. I picked up my charcoal pencil. I looked at the drawing of the fireplace. I needed to figure out the mantelpiece detail. It needed to be grand, but welcoming, maybe reclaimed oak or local stone. I leaned over the paper, my mind instantly switching gears. The image of Derek and his 500 rented chairs faded into the background, becoming nothing more than a faint, amusing story from a book I had finished reading. I had work to do, real work. And for the first time in years, work was the most interesting thing in my life. The countdown to the wedding of the century, or at least the wedding Derek believed defined the century, began exactly 1 week before the actual date. I was sitting on my back porch sketching a lighting concept for the Silver Tides Inn's main dining room. I wanted the fixtures to look like suspended CLS, catching the light of the setting sun. The air was cool, smelling of salt and damp earth, a stark contrast to the stifling heat I knew was currently baking Chicago. My phone buzzed. It was Meyer. Her face popped up on the screen, her expression a mix of concern and suppressed excitement. Okay, she said, skipping the hello. Next Saturday is the day. How are we feeling? Do we need to burn an effigy? Do we need to throw darts at a picture? I am ready to fly out there with a bottle of tequila and a box of tissues if you need me. I laughed, looking up from my sketch pad. I am fine, Maya. Honestly, look at this. I turned the camera around to show her the view of the ocean where the waves were currently rolling in with a hypnotic rhythmic crash. I am designing a dining room that overlooks this. I do not have time to burn effigies. Meyer aside, looking relieved, but also a little disappointed that she would not be participating in a ritualistic breakdown. You are unnervingly healthy about this, but you should know the circus has officially come to town. Liner is telling everyone who will listen that her dress is a custom design from Paris. She hired the same photographer who shot the cover of City Style magazine last month. She is treating this like a royal coronation. And Derek? I asked, surprising myself with how little the name stung. Derek is strutting around the office like a peacock, Meyer said, lowering her voice. He told the junior partners that this wedding is him leveling up. He actually used those words. Tesser, leveling up as if you were the starter level and she is the boss fight. I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. Let him think that if he needs $300 per plate dinner to feel important, that is his problem. I have a deadline. When the actual Saturday arrived, Harbor Ridge did not care about Derek Cole. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the wind was brisk. It was a perfect day for drying laundry, which is exactly what I did in the morning. I hung my sheets on the line, enjoying the snap of the fabric in the breeze, while Derek was likely screaming at a florist about the shade of the hydrangeas. I was pruning my lavender bushes, while Lana was likely hyperventilating over her makeup. I was marinating 2 whole chickens with lemon, garlic, and rosemary from my own garden. I had invited the team from Aurora Nest over for dinner. We had just received approval from the Historical Society for our renovation plans, a massive hurdle we had cleared earlier than expected. Grayson had suggested a drink at the local pub, but I insisted on hosting. I wanted to fill my house with people. I wanted to fill it with noise that wasn't the television or the ghosts of my own thoughts. By 4 in the afternoon, my kitchen smelled like heaven. I was chopping vegetables for a salad when my phone chimed. It was a photo from Meyer. Caption, "It begins." The photo showed the ballroom of Cedar Line Manor. I had to admit it was impressive. The ceilings were draped in white silk. There were towering arrangements of white orchids and lilies on every table, flowers that probably cost more than my first car. The lighting was purple and gold, aggressive and expensive. It looked less like a wedding and more like a stage set for a reality television show. Another photo followed. Caption, "The guests are arriving. I have never seen so many tuxedos in the daylight. It is ridiculous." I wiped my hands on my apron and typed back, "Have a drink for me. Try the shrimp, Tesser," a voice called from the front yard. I looked out the window to see Grayson walking up the path, holding a bottle of wine and a rustic loaf of bread. Leo and Sam, the 2 draftsmen, were trailing behind him, carrying a large bowl of potato salad and a pie box from the bakery. "The door is open," I yelled. They piled into the kitchen, bringing with them a burst of energy and cool air. Grayson set the wine on the counter and looked around, taking in the space. He had never been inside my house before. He looked at the exposed wooden beams, the old stone fireplace, and the way the late afternoon light hit the worn oak floor. "This place," Grayson said quietly, running a hand over the back of a chair. "It is incredible, Tesser. You can feel the history. It has good bones," I said, smiling at him, "and it likes having people inside it. Smells better than the studio," Leo joked, eyeing the oven. "Is that rosemary fresh from the garden?" I said, as we settled into the living room, opening the wine and breaking off chunks of the crusty bread. My phone buzzed again and again and again. Meyer was live texting the ceremony. Caption, "Here comes the bride. The dress is certainly a choice. Very puffy. She looks like a marshmallow that fell into a sequin factory." Caption, "Derek is crying, but like theatrical crying. He keeps checking to see if the camera is on him." Caption, "The vows. Oh my God, Tesser. He just promised to build an empire with her. Who says that at a wedding then?" A text message. "Do you want me to FaceTime you? I can hide the phone under a napkin. You need to see this to believe how dumb they look. It is the best comedy in town." I looked at the phone. I looked at the little screen that offered a window into a ballroom 500 m away. I could see it. I could see Derek standing there sweating in his expensive suit, desperate for validation, desperate for everyone to envy him. I could see Lena, young and beautiful, and completely unaware that she had married a man who viewed her as an accessory. I looked up. Grayson was laughing at a story Sam was telling about a contractor who tried to use plywood instead of mahogany. The fire was crackling in the hearth. The light in the room was golden and warm, not purple and artificial. No, I typed back to Meyer. I do not need to see it. I am busy cooking for people who respect me. Have fun. I silenced the phone. Then I opened the drawer of the side table and dropped it inside. I slid the drawer shut with a definitive click. "Is everything okay?" Grayson asked, noticing the movement. "Everything is perfect," I said. "Dinner is ready." We ate at the big wooden table, passing plates of roasted chicken and salad. We talked about the hotel project. We argued playfully about whether brass or nickel fixtures were more historically accurate for the lobby. We talked about movies. We talked about life. There was no pretense here. No one was trying to impress anyone. Grayson was wearing a flannel shirt. Leo had a smudge of ink on his cheek. The The wine was $1.20 a bottle, not 200. But the laughter was real. The warmth was real. I want to propose a toast, Grayson said, raising his glass as the meal wound down. The candles were burning low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. To the Historical Society's approval, Sam said, raising his glass. No, Grayson said, looking directly at me across the table. His eyes were kind and steady, and they saw me. Not the designer, not the employee, but me. To Tesser for breathing new life into the project and for making a house feel like a home. We are lucky you found your way to Harbor Ridge. My throat tightened. I felt a flush of heat rise to my cheeks, but it was a good heat. Thank you, I whispered. I am the lucky one. Weakling kicked glasses. The sound rang out clear and sweet at that exact moment in a ballroom in Chicago. Derek Cole was walking into his reception. The doors had swung open. The orchestra had swelled to a crescendo and the announcer had boomed, Mr. and Mrs. Derek Cole. He was walking under crystal chandeliers, holding the hand of a woman 20 years his junior, surrounded by 300 people who were drinking his champagne and judging his choices. He felt like a king. He felt like he had conquered the world. He was scanning the room, making sure every eye was on him, feeding on the attention like a starving man. But in Harbor Ridge, I was not hungry. I was full. The dinner wound down late. The guys helped me clean up, stacking the dishes in the sink despite my protests. When they finally left, walking down the path with waves and promises to see me Monday, the house fell quiet again. But it was a happy quiet. The smell of the food lingered. The warmth of the evening remained. I walked out onto the back porch. The ocean was black now, vast and endless under the stars. The tide was coming in. I leaned against the railing and took a deep breath. I thought about the drawer in the living room where my phone lay silent. I did not wonder what was happening at Cedarline Manor. I did not care if they were cutting the cake or dancing the first dance. I had cut the cord, not with anger, but with indifference. I had built a fire on my own hearth, and it was burning bright enough to keep me warm. I stood there, watching the white foam of the waves in the darkness, feeling a profound sense of peace settling over my shoulders like a heavy blanket. I did not know it then. I could not have known. But 500 m away in that glittery, noisy ballroom, the atmosphere was about to shift. The champagne was flowing. The guests were loosening their ties. And at a table near the back, a man named Harold Doyle was leaning in to speak to a group of investors, and the name Tesser Monroe was hovering on his lips, ready to drop like a stone into a still pond and shatter the reflection of Derek's perfect night. The morning after the wedding of the century broke over Harbor Ridge with a serenity that felt almost suspicious. The fog was lifting off the water, revealing a steel-gray ocean that looked like a sheet of hammered metal. I stood in my kitchen, barefoot on the cool wood floor, watching the steam rise from my ceramic mug. I slept for 9 hours. It was the deep, dreamless sleep of a woman who had nothing to hide and no one to impress. I was just reaching for the window latch to let in the salt air when my phone, which I had retrieved from the drawer, began to vibrate against the granite countertop. It was Meyer again, but this was not the drunk text-heavy Meyer of last night. This was a video call, and when I swiped to answer, her face filled the screen with an intensity that made me take a step back. She looked like she had just won the lottery, or perhaps witnessed a bank heist. Her hair was messy. She was wearing a silk robe, and she was clutching a mug of coffee with both hands, as if it were an anchor keeping her tethered to the earth. "Tesser," she said. Her voice was a ragged whisper, the kind that comes from screaming too much or laughing too hard. "Sit down. Do not argue with me. Put your butt in a chair right now." "I am standing," I said, leaning against the counter. "I am fine. Did the cake topple over? Did it rain?" "Oh, honey," Meyer said, her eyes widening. "The cake did not just topple. The entire world toppled. My husband just woke up. He got home at 3:00 in the morning. He said he has never in his 40 years on this planet seen a disaster so spectacular. He was laughing so hard he was crying. He actually woke up with sore abs." I felt a prickle of curiosity on the back of my neck. "What happened, Meyer?" "Okay." She took a deep breath. "So, picture the scene. It is 11:00. The dinner is over. The speeches are done. Derek gave a speech about himself, obviously, and everyone is mingling. Derek and Lorna are doing the rounds, holding hands, looking like the king and queen of the prom. They are walking toward the VIP section near the bar, and sitting right there is Harold Doyle. I frowned, trying to place the name. Harold Doyle, the venture capitalist. The very same, Meyer said. He was an investor in one of Derek's old firms. So he got a pity invite to pad the guest list. But here's the thing. Harold Doyle loves two things: investing in real estate and drinking aged scotch. And apparently, he had been doing a lot of the latter. Meyer leaned closer to the camera. So Derek walks up to him, chest puffed out, expecting a compliment on the venue, and Harold, loud as a foghorn, claps Derek on the shoulder and shouts, "Cole, good to see you. I just got back from the coast. Spent a week looking at properties in Harbor Ridge." My heart stopped for a beat. Derek freezes. Meyer continued, acting it out with her hands. He gives this tight little smile and tries to steer the conversation away. He says something like, "Oh, nice town. Very quaint." But Harold is not done. Harold is just getting started. He looks around at the group of men standing there, important men, Tesser potential clients. And he says, "Quaint, it is a gold mine. And speaking of gold, do you gentlemen know Tesser Monroe, Cole's ex-wife?" I gripped my mug tighter. "Oh, no." "Oh, yes." Meyer grinned wickedly. Derek goes pale. He tries to laugh it off. He says, "Yes. Well, Tesser prefers a quiet life." But Harold shakes his head. He says, "Quite. That girl is living like a queen. I saw her place. That cottage on the cliff. It is prime real estate. And she is the lead designer on the Silver Tides in project. The investors are eating out of her hand. That girl has a golden mind. I tried to hire her for my own resort, but she is booked solid." I let out a breath. I did not know I was holding. It was strange to hear my success validated by a stranger, filtered through my best friend, about a moment happening 500 m away. But that was just the jab, Meyer said, her voice dropping lower. Here comes the knockout punch. Derek is standing there holding his champagne glass, and his hand starts to shake. You could actually see the liquid rippling. He tries to pull Lorna away, but she is basking in the attention, not realizing the conversation has turned dangerous. And then Harold says it. He drops the bomb. "What did he say?" I whispered. He takes a sip of his scotch and says, loud enough for the next 3 tables to hear, and smart, too. Her grandmother left her that massive trust fund. What was it? $2.4 million. Most women would have taken the money and shopped for a year. But Tesser, she locked it up in investments and went back to work. That is class. That is old money behavior. You let a real winner go there. Cole, the silence in my kitchen was absolute. I could hear the refrigerator humming. 2.4 million. Meyer repeated, savoring the number. He said it in front of everyone, in front of his boss, in front of his rivals, in front of Lorna. What did Derek do? He turned into a statue. Meyer said, my husband said it was like watching a man's soul leave his body. He went from red to gray in 3 seconds. He looked at Lorna, and for the first time all night, he did not look like he was in love. He looked like he was doing math. He was calculating exactly how much money he had walked away from because he thought you were a burden. That is heavy, I said. Wait, Meyer said, holding up a finger. It gets worse because Calmer is not satisfied with just a flesh wound. Calmer wanted a fatality. Standing right next to Harold was a guy named Mr. Henderson. Not your lawyer, a different Henderson. He is a credit manager at First National Bank. A dry, boring little man who never gossips. But I guess the atmosphere was contagious. Meyer took a dramatic sip of coffee. So the room is buzzing with the news that you are a secret millionaire. People are whispering. Lorna is looking confused because she thought she was the prize. And this bank manager clears his throat and says in this very matter-of-fact voice, "It is funny you mention money. It has been a stressful month for the new couple. MS. Brooks was in my office just last Tuesday." I cringed. Please tell me he did not. He did. Meyer nodded vigorously. He says she was quite upset. She had to take out a high-interest personal loan against her car to cover the deposit for this ballroom. She was complaining, rather loudly, that she had to float Mr. Cole alone because his credit cards were maxed out. She said something about him being assetry, but cash poor except without the assets. I closed my eyes. It was brutal. It was a public evisceration. The room went silent. Meyer whispered dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet. So here is the picture. Tesser. Everyone now knows that Derek left a woman who is secretly a millionaire and a rising star in the design world to marry a 24-year-old secretary who he is currently borrowing money from just to pay for the party to impress him. Oh, Derek, I murmured. He must have died. He did not die, Myers said. He exploded. It was like watching a pressure cooker blow its lid. He looked at Lana. She was standing there clutching her bouquet, looking terrified because the bank manager had just outed her financial situation and Derek just lost it. The champagne glass in his hand. He squeezed it so hard it shattered. Just crushed it. Shards of glass everywhere. Blood started dripping onto the white tablecloth, but he did not even feel it. He screamed, Myers said, her eyes wide. He screamed at her in front of 300 people. He yelled, "You told them you went around town telling people you are paying for me. You told them I am broke." He made it about his ego. I said, of course he did. Lana started crying. Meyer continued. She is sobbing, saying, "I just wanted it to be perfect for you, but he is not hearing it." He kicks the table. I mean, physically kick the table. The centerpiece wobbles, falls over, and knocks into the wedding cake. The 5-tier $3,000 cake. It tips in slow motion. Tesser, it crashes onto the floor. Frosting everywhere, splattered on the guests, splattered on Lana's custom Parisian dress. "No," I gasped. "Yes," Meyer confirmed. And that is when the phones came out. People were not filming the first dance anymore. They were filming the groom having a meltdown. Derek is screaming that he is ruined. Larner is wailing in a pile of cake. The guests are trying to back away without getting icing on their tuxedos. My husband said the best part was Harold Doyle. He just stood there sipping his scotch, watching the chaos he caused, and said, "Well, that is unfortunate." Meyer let out a short, sharp laugh. The party ended right there. Security had to come in to calm Derek down because he was thrashing around, cutting his hand up even more. The guests fled like it was the Titanic. Derek Cole wanted a wedding that people would talk about for years. Well, congratulations to him. He got it. It is already trending on social media. Someone uploaded a video titled "Groom Crashes His Own Stock Market." It has 50,000 views. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. I tried to summon a feeling of triumph. I tried to feel the rush of victory that you are supposed to feel when your enemy destroys themselves. But I just felt cold, and strangely, I felt distant. It sounded like a story about strangers. The man screaming about his credit score was not the man I had married. Or maybe he was, and I had just been too blind to see it. He was a man built of paper dissolving the moment it rained. He humiliated her, I said softly. He humiliated himself, but he took her down with him. She signed up for it. Tesser, Meyer said, her voice hardening. She wanted the man to leave his wife. She got him. This is who he is. You just got out before the explosion. I did, I said. I looked out the window at the ocean. It was so vast, so indifferent to human folly. I really did. So Meyer said, taking a deep breath. The word is that the investors who were at the wedding, the ones Derek was trying to impress, are not happy. Displays of public instability are bad for business. He did not just ruin his marriage last night. He might have torched his career. He will blame me, I said somehow in his head. This will be my fault. Let him, Mars said fiercely. Let him blame the moon and the tides. It does not matter. He is stuck in a pile of cake and debt in Chicago. You are in a seaside cottage with $2 million and a hot boss. Racing is not like that. I stammered, feeling the blush rise. Yet Meyer winked. Go drink your coffee, Tesser. Go walk on your beach. The wicked witch is dead. Or rather, the wicked warlock has melted. You won, and you did not even have to lift a finger. I didn't win, Meyer. I said, looking at the piece of my kitchen, the sunlight hitting the floorboards, the sketch pad waiting for me on the table. I just survived, and that is better. We said our goodbyes, and the screen went black. I put the phone down. I picked up my coffee. It was still warm. I walked out onto the porch. The air was crisp. A seagull cried overhead. I took a sip of coffee and looked at the horizon. I thought about Derek standing in the wreckage of his vanity, bleeding onto a rented carpet. I felt a pang of pity, sharp and brief, and then it vanished, carried away by the sea breeze. I turned my back on the ocean and walked back inside. I had a lighting concept to finish. The silver tides needed me, and I had a lot of work to do. I sat there for a long time after the screen went black. The coffee in my mug had turned stone cold, a dark, unappealing liquid that mirrored the sudden, stark clarity in my mind. Meyer had expected me to jump up and down on the sofa. She had expected me to pop a bottle of champagne and toast to the destruction of the man who had broken my heart, but I did not feel like celebrating. I felt a strange, hollow chill. It was the terrifying realization of how fragile a life built on lies actually is. Derek had spent 8 years constructing a fortress of ego and status, brick by expensive brick, and it had taken exactly one sentence, spoken by a tipsy old man in a tuxedo, to bring the whole thing crashing down. The days that followed were a blur of contrasting realities, playing out like a split-screen movie where one side is a tragedy and the other is a triumph. In Chicago, the fallout was swift and nuclear. The video of Derek's meltdown at the wedding had been scrubbed from the major social media platforms within 24 hours, likely costing him a small fortune in reputation management fees. But the internet is a hider. Cut off one head and 2 more appear. The clip had already circulated in private WhatsApp groups, industry forums, and email chains. It was titled The Wedding Crash, and it was being watched by the very people Derek needed to impress by Monday morning. The hemorrhage began. Meyer told me later that 3 of Derek's biggest clients had sent termination letters before lunch. They did not cite the wedding explicitly. They used polite legal terms like reassessing brand alignment and shifting strategic partnerships, but the subtext was screamingly loud. No one wanted to trust their portfolio to a man who flipped tables and screamed about debt at his own black tie event. On Wednesday, a major European conglomerate that Derek had been courting for 6 months pulled out of a merger deal. Their rejection was far less subtle. The email, which was leaked by a disgruntled assistant, stated that the company had a strict policy against partnering with executives who displayed public volatility and controversial family conduct. Derek tried to fight it. He went on a damage control tour. He blamed the alcohol. He blamed the stress of wedding planning. He tried to spin the narrative that he was the victim of a malicious rumor started by a jealous ex-wife, though he was careful never to say my name directly. But the smell of desperation is hard to mask even with expensive cologne. And then there was Lorna, the blushing bride. The woman who had smirked at me across the courtroom simply vanished. She deleted her Instagram account. She stopped coming into the office. The rumors swirling around the water cooler were vicious. People began to whisper that the pregnancy, the urgent reason for the rushed wedding, had been nothing more than a strategic lie to lock Derek down. There were no doctor appointments, no ultrasound pictures, just a sudden need for privacy. She had gambled on Derek being her golden ticket, and when the ticket turned out to be counterfeit, she retreated to the shadows, leaving him to face the creditors alone. While Derek's world was burning, mine was blooming. The same week that Derek lost his biggest client, I walked into Aurora Nest studio to find Grayson standing by the window, a look of utter disbelief on his face. "Tesser," he said, turning to me, "you are not going to believe who just called." "But," I asked, setting down my bag. "Harold Doyle," Grayson said, "the venture capitalist." My stomach did a small flip. "Mr. Doyle, what did he want?" "He wants to double his investment in the Silver Tides Inn," Grayson said, shaking his head as if he could not quite process the math. "He said he was in town a few weeks ago, incognito. He apparently walked past your grandmother's cottage and saw the garden. He asked around town about who lived there. Then he saw the preliminary sketches you did for the inn's lobby." Grayson walked over to the table and picked up a contract. "He told me, and I quote, 'That woman understands that luxury is not about gold leaf. It is about peace. If she is leading the design, I am writing the blank check.'" He was apparently at a wedding recently, that reminded him of everything he hates about modern excess, and it made him appreciate your aesthetic even more. I stood there stunned. Harold Doyle had not just exposed Derek, he had inadvertently funded my future. So Grayson continued, his voice dropping to a serious professional tone. We need to make some changes. I cannot keep you as a freelancer, Tesser. It would be theft. He slid a piece of paper across the desk toward me. I want you to come on as lead designer. Full benefits, a salary that is 40% higher than what we discussed initially, and I want to offer you a 5% equity stake in the studio. You are bringing value here that I cannot quantify, and I want you to be a partner in what we build. I looked at the number on the paper. It was more than I had ever made in Chicago. It was a number that meant safety. It meant I could fix the roof on the cottage without thinking twice. It meant I was valued not for how well I supported a man, but for the work I did with my own 2 hands. Grayson, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Yes, absolutely. Yes. But he smiled, and the warmth of it reached his eyes. Now let us get to work. We have a hotel to resurrect. Later that afternoon, I sat in my garden. The lavender was humming with bees. I opened my laptop to check my personal email. There was a notification from the bank. Subject Trust Fund Disbursement Confirmation. I clicked it open. The numbers were stark black against the white screen. $2,400,000. It was sitting there in my account. I stared at it. I thought about how many times Derek had complained about money. I thought about how he had scrutinized my grocery bills, asking why I bought the organic spinach instead of the regular kind to save $2. I thought about how he had convinced me that we were a team, all while he was siphoning our savings to buy gifts for Lana. If he had known about this money, he would have never let me go. He would have played the devoted husband until the day he could get his name on the account. He would have drained it dry to feed his insecurity, buying sports cars and gold chairs until there was nothing left but dust. The money was safe. It was mine. And the fact that he was currently drowning in debt while I sat on a fortune he had walked away from was an irony so sharp it could cut glass. My phone buzzed. It was Meyer. Liar, you are not going to believe the latest. Derek is trying to sell the condo. He is telling people he wants to downsize to be closer to the city center, but everyone knows he needs the cash to pay off the wedding vendors. The florist is threatening to sue him. I looked at the text. I felt that same cold distance I had felt the morning after the wedding. It was cathartic. It was tragic. But it was no longer my story. I typed a reply. My fingers moved slowly but deliberately. Tesser, Meyer, I love you and I appreciate you looking out for me, but I need to ask you a favor. Liar, anything. Name it. Tesser, from now on, please do not tell me anything else about him. I do not want to know if he sells the condo. I do not want to know if Lana comes back. I do not want to know if he goes bankrupt. I want my life to be completely empty of his name. There was a pause. The 3 little dots appeared and disappeared. Meyer, I understand. You are right. He is in the rear-view mirror. Consider the subject closed. I put the phone down on the garden table. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of salt and flowers. I had a new job. I had a beautiful home. I had a bank account that guaranteed my freedom for the rest of my life. And I had a peace that Derek Cole would never ever understand. I thought it was over. I thought that by closing the door on the information, I had closed the door on the man. I thought I could simply write him out of the script and continue my story in the sunlight. But fate is a funny thing. It rarely lets people off the hook that easily. And while I was done with Derek, Derek was not done with the world. And desperation makes people do dangerous, unpredictable things. I picked up my gardening shears and went back to the roses. I did not know that the storm had not fully passed. I did not know that the man who had discarded me was about to realize that I was the only life raft he had left, and that he would try to drag me back into his drowning waters one last time. But for now there was only the sun, the wind, and the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. I snipped a dead bloom off the rose bush, watching it fall to the earth, and turned my face toward the light. 3 months had passed since the catastrophe at Cedar Line Manor, and the rhythm of my life had settled into a steady, productive beat. The Silver Tides Inn was no longer just a concept on paper. It was a construction site filled with the smell of sawdust and the sound of hammers. Aurora Nest Studio had recently been shortlisted for a luxury eco-resort project in Oregon, a massive contract that Grayson and I had celebrated with a bottle of champagne, a real celebration, not a performance. My career was blooming with the same ferocity as the wild roses in my garden, while the reports from Chicago, which I now only received through the grapevine of industry news, painted a picture of a man in free fall. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and heavy with impending rain. I was sitting in my living room, reviewing fabric swatches for the hotel lobby, when I saw a figure standing at my front gate. At first, I thought it was a delivery driver lost in the mist, but as the figure pushed open the gate and began the long walk up the gravel path, my stomach gave a lurch of recognition. The walk was familiar, but the posture was wrong. The confident chest-forward stride I had known for 8 years was gone, replaced by a hunch, a hesitation. It was Derek. I stood up and walked to the door, my heart rate spiking, not out of love or fear, but out of sheer surprise. I watched him climb the porch steps. He was soaking wet. He was wearing a trench coat that looked like it had been slept in, and his shoes, usually Italian leather polished to a mirror's shine, were scuffed and coated in mud. He raised a hand to knock, but I opened the door before his knuckles could graze the wood. "Hello, Derek," I said. He jumped slightly, his eyes widening. He looked terrible. His face was gaunt, the skin gray and slack around his jaw. There were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and too much scotch. "Tesser," he croaked. His voice was rough. "I was in the area. I thought I would stop by." "In the area," I repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Harbor Bridge is 4 hours from the nearest airport." "Derek, nobody is in the area." He let out a weak laugh, running a hand through his damp hair. "Right, you always were the logical one. Can I come in? It is pouring out here." I hesitated. My instinct, the old instinct of the beautiful wife, was to usher him in, get him a towel, and make him hot tea. But that woman was gone. I looked at him and saw a stranger dripping water onto my porch. "You can come into the living room," I said, stepping aside just enough to let him pass. "But leave your shoes on the mat." He stepped inside, looking around the entryway with a hunger that made me uncomfortable. He took in the antique rug, the fresh flowers on the console table, the smell of beeswax and lemon. "It is nice," he said, his voice low. "Cozy, not like the cold glass box I'm living in now." "Come," I said, leading him to the armchair furthest from the kitchen. I sat on the sofa opposite him, placing the coffee table firmly between us like a barricade. I did not offer him a drink. I did not offer to take his coat. He sat down, gripping the arms of the chair as if he were afraid it might eject him. "So," I said, folding my hands in my lap, "why are you here, Derek?" He took a deep breath and suddenly his face shifted. He put on a mask of contrition, a look I had seen a dozen times before when he had forgotten a birthday or stayed out too late. It was the puppy dog look designed to elicit sympathy. "I made a mistake, Tesser," he began, leaning forward. "A terrible, massive mistake. Larner, she was a lapse in judgment. It was a midlife crisis, plain and simple. I was under so much pressure at the firm, and she was just there, and I let my ego get the better of me. It was the worst decision of my life." He paused, waiting for me to comfort him. When I stayed silent, he continued, his voice gaining a frantic edge. "She is gone. You know, left me the week after the wedding fiasco. Took the car, too. She was never the one, Tesser. She did not know me like you do. She did not understand the history. I have been sitting in that empty condo thinking about us, about how good we were before I messed it up." I watched him perform. It was fascinating in a morbid way. He was trying to rewrite history, trying to paint himself as the victim of a predatory younger woman and pressure rather than a man who had systematically devalued his wife for years. "We were not good, Derek," I said calmly. "We were convenient for you, and now that your new life is inconvenient, you are romanticizing the past." He flinched. "That is harsh." "It is the truth." He wiped his face with his hand, dropping the sentimental act. He realized it was not working. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room again. "Look, Tesser," he said, his tone shifting to something that tried to sound businesslike. but landed on desperation. I did not just come here to apologize. I came because I have a proposition. A proposition, I repeated. I am leaving the firm, he said, or rather, we are parting ways. The industry in Chicago is toxic right now. Too much gossip. I am starting fresh. I have a concept for a boutique consultancy firm, high-end crisis management and branding. I have contacts. I have the experience. But the banks are being difficult because of the liquidity issues from the wedding. He leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto mine. I need a silent partner, someone to provide the seed capital to get off the ground. I thought of you. You are smart. You have a good eye. And well, we are family in a way. If you help me this one time, just a loan, I can turn it around. I can pay you back with interest within a year. I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. The man who had sneered at my career, who had left me for a secretary, who had humiliated me in court, was now sitting in my grandmother's house asking me to fund his next failing venture. You want me to invest in you? I stated. It is a solid business plan, he insisted, pulling a damp envelope from his coat pocket. I have the projections right here. Put it away, Derek, I said. He froze. Tesser, please just look at it. I know you have the means. I stiffened. What do you mean? I have the means. He let out a bitter, jagged laugh. Oh, come on. Stop playing the humble artist. I know about the trust fund. I know about the $2,400,000. The air in the room seemed to drop 10. How do you know that? I asked, my voice ice. Harold Doyle. Derek spat the name out like a curse. The man cannot keep his mouth shut when he has had a few scotches. I ran into him at a bar in the city last week. He was holding court, telling anyone who would listen about the brilliant designer in Harbor Ridge and how her grandmother was a genius for locking up her fortune so her deadbeat ex-husband couldn't touch a cent. Derek looked at me, his eyes filled with a toxic mix of envy and rage. He told everyone, Tesser. He laughed about it. He said Nora knew I was a gold digger before I even knew I was one. Do you have any idea what that felt like to stand there and hear that my wife, my ex-wife, was sitting on a fortune while I was selling my watch to pay rent? It is not your money, Derek, I said quietly. It never was. We were married for 8 years, he shouted, his voice cracking. I supported you while you played around with your little freelance projects. I paid the mortgage. I paid for the vacations. And you had this safety net the whole time. You let me walk out of that courtroom thinking I was being generous by giving you the honor. You must have been laughing your head off. I was not laughing, I said. I was terrified. I did not know about the money until I was on the train. But even if I had known, I would not have told you because I knew exactly what you would do. I stood up. The movement was sudden enough that he flinched back into his chair. You would have drained it, I said, looking down at him. You would have used it to buy a bigger house, a faster car, and eventually a more expensive mistress. You would have consumed it like you consumed everything else. My grandmother protected me from you, Derek, and she was right. I am desperate, Tesser, he whispered, the fight draining out of him. I am drowning. They are going to foreclose on the condo. My reputation is shot. I have nowhere to go. Then you will have to figure it out. I said you are a grown man. You told me once that everyone is responsible for their own destiny. You told me that when I asked for help with my student loans. Do you remember? You said you need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. He looked down at his muddy shoes. I am not going to give you money. I said firmly, my assets are tied up in trusts and investments that you cannot touch. My lawyer made sure of that, and even if I could access it for you, I wouldn't because enabling you isn't helping you. It is just prolonging the inevitable. So you are just going to let me sink? He asked, looking up with wet eyes. I am letting you swim, I said, or sink. That is up to you. But you cannot do it in my living room. I walked to the front door and opened it. The rain was falling harder now, a gray curtain against the world. Derek sat there for a long moment. He looked at the warmth of the fire. He looked at the soft linen curtains. He looked at the life he had thrown away because he thought he could do better. Slowly, painfully, he stood up. He buttoned his damp trench coat. He walked toward the door, passing me without meeting my eyes. "I really did love you once," he muttered as he stepped onto the porch. "I know," I said. "You loved me right up until you decided I was not enough. Goodbye, Derek." He stepped out into the rain. He did not run to a car because there was no car waiting. He walked down the gravel path, his shoulders hunched against the wind, his expensive shoes squelching in the mud. I watched him go. I watched him until he was just a dark smudge in the mist, trudging toward the bus stop at the edge of town. I closed the door. I turned the lock. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited for the urge to run after him, to write him a check, to fix him one last time. But the feeling never came. Instead, I felt a profound vibrating gratitude. I thought of Grandma Nora sitting on this very porch, seeing a future I could not see, and building a wall around me to keep the wolves out. I walked back into the living room. I picked up the envelope Derek had left on the coffee table, his business plan. I did not open it. I tossed it into the fireplace. I watched the flames curl around the paper, turning his desperate dreams into ash and smoke. The fire crackled warm and bright. I sat back down in my armchair, picked up my fabric swatches, and went back to work. The storm was raging outside, but inside everything was dry, safe, and completely mine. The silence that followed Derek's departure from my front porch was not the peaceful silence of a storm passing. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a predator holding its breath before the pounce. I knew him too well. I knew that the man who had stood in my living room, dripping rain and fighting remorse, had not walked away with acceptance. He had walked away with a map of my vulnerabilities. 2 weeks went by. I immersed myself in the logistics of the silver tides in renovation, arguing over permit applications and sourcing vintage brass fixtures. I almost convinced myself that Derek had finally hit rock bottom and given up. Then the email arrived. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my drafting table, drinking green tea, when a notification popped up from the encrypted portal of the Sterling Trust Management Group, the firm handling Grandma Nora's bequest. Subject: urgent verification required. Withdrawal request 4092. I frowned. I had not requested a withdrawal. I had specifically instructed Mr. Henderson to reinvest the quarterly dividends into low-risk municipal bonds. I opened the email. My blood ran cold. Attached was a PDF of a request for expedited liquidation. It authorized the immediate transfer of $150,000 to a shell company called Phoenix Consultant, LLC. The reason listed was urgent angel investment capital, and at the bottom of the page was my signature. It was not a digital signature. It was a wet ink signature scanned and uploaded. It looped the T in Tesser exactly the way I used to do it 5 years ago. It had the same slight upward slant that Derek used to tease me about. To an outsider, it looked authentic to me. It looked like a ghost. But there was one flaw. The document was dated October 14th. I picked up my phone. I did not call Derek. I called my lawyer, a sharp-edged woman named Elena, who specialized in financial fraud. "We have a problem," I said, my voice steady, "and I know exactly who did it." The meeting took place 3 days later at the headquarters of the trust fund in Seattle. I flew in that morning, dressed in a tailored cream suit that cost more than my entire wardrobe for my married life. I was not there to play the victim. I was there to play the executioner. The conference room was on the 42nd floor, a glass-walled box that offered a panoramic view of the city Derek had once claimed he would conquer. When I walked in, flanked by Elena and the senior trust officer, Derek was already there. He looked like a man trying to hold a crumbling dam together with Scotch tape. He was wearing a suit that I recognized, one of his older ones, slightly tight across the shoulders. Now, on his wrist, the PC Philippe watch he used to flaunt was gone, replaced by a generic steel chronograph that probably cost $200 at a department store. He stood up when I entered, a flash of his old charm flickering across his face. "Tesser," he said, extending a hand, "I am glad you came. I told these gentlemen it was just a misunderstanding, a communication error between our assistants." I did not shake his hand. I did not even look at it. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. "Sit down, Derek," I said. He blinked, surprised by the command, but he sank back into his chair. He tried to smile at the trust officer. My ex-wife gets anxious about paperwork. I was just trying to expedite a deal we discussed. We never discussed a deal, I said, placing a manila folder on the table. And we certainly never discussed you forging my signature to steal $150,000. Steal is a harsh word, Derek said, his laugh brittle. It is a bridge loan. I authorized it on your behalf because I knew you would want it on the ground floor of Phoenix Consulting. It is going to be huge, Tesser. Mr. Cole, the trust officer interrupted, his voice dry as dust. The document submitted bears a signature that MS. Monroe claims is a forgery. That is the issue at hand. It is not a forgery, Derek insisted, leaning forward, sweat beating on his upper lip. Tesser signed it. Maybe she forgot. She has been under a lot of stress with the move. I opened my folder. I took out 2 pieces of paper. This, I said, sliding the first paper across the glass table, is the withdrawal request dated October 14th. Right. Derek nodded. Like I said. And this, I said, sliding the second paper, is a time-stamped photograph and a sworn affidavit from the site foreman at the Silver Tides Inn on October 14th from 8 in the morning until 6:00 in the evening. I was on a scaffold in Harbor Ridge inspecting ceiling tiles. Harbor Ridge is 4 hours away from the city where this document was allegedly notarized. I pointed to the notary stamp on his document. This notary, he is located in downtown Chicago, unless I have discovered the ability to teleport. Derek, I did not sign this. Derek stared at the photo. It showed me in a hard hat covered in dust, clearly nowhere near a notary public. Well, he stammered, pulling at his collar. Maybe I got the date wrong. My assistant, she is new. She messes up the filing sometimes. I probably signed it for you as your proxy because of the urgency. You are not her proxy. Elena cut in, her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel, and attempting to access a secured trust fund using falsified credentials is not a filing error. Mr. Cole, it is wire fraud. It is identity theft, and since the amount exceeds $100,000, it is a felony that carries a mandatory prison sentence. The color drained from Derek's face so completely he looked like a wax figure. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind only raw, naked fear. Prison, he whispered. We have the IP logs. The trust officer added. The request was uploaded from a computer registered to your condo's IP address. We have the notary on the phone waiting to confirm he never saw MS. Monroe, we have everything. Derek looked at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. He looked like a cornered animal. Tesser, he gasped. You cannot do this. You cannot send me to jail. I am my husband. We shared a life. I am desperate. I just needed the cash to float the business for a month. I would have paid it back. I swear. I looked at him. I saw the man who had vowed to protect me. I saw the man who had laughed at my dreams. I saw the man who had used my social security number, which he knew by heart, to try and rob me of the security my grandmother gave me. You taught me something very important, Derek, I said softly. You taught me that in business there are no friends, only leverage. I signaled to Elena. She pulled a thick document from her briefcase and slid it across the table toward Derek. I am not interested in a long criminal trial. I said, I do not want to spend the next 2 years seeing your face in a courtroom. I have a hotel to build. Derek looked at the document, confused. What is this? It is a deal, I said. You signed this. It is a legally binding agreement stating that you acknowledge the fraud. It creates a permanent restraining order. It waives any and all future claims you might ever conjure up regarding my assets, my estate, or my earnings. It states that if you ever contact me, approach me, or mention my name in a public forum again, I will hand the evidence of this fraud over to the district attorney immediately. I leaned forward. Sign it and you walk out of here. You stay broke, but you stay free. Don't sign it, and the officers waiting in the lobby will come up and arrest you right now. Derek looked at the paper. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. He looked at the door, then back at me. He realized there was no charm left to use. No smile would fix this. No lie would cover it. You really would send me to prison, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. You tried to steal my future, Derek. I said, I am just protecting it. He picked up the pen. He did not read the clauses. He simply signed his name on the line, the scratch of the ink sounding loud in the silent room. He pushed the paper back to me. Are we done? He asked, his voice hollow. We are done, I said. For good. He stood up. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The suit hung off his frame. He looked like a ghost of the man who had walked into that restaurant months ago to divorce me. He walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle, as if he wanted to say one last thing, maybe an apology, maybe a curse, but he looked at my face, stone cold and resolute, and he decided against it. He opened the door and walked out. I waited until the door clicked shut. I nodded to the trust officer. Thank you. Please ensure the security protocols on my account are updated. Already done, MS. Monroe, he said with respect. I stood up and walked to the elevator with Eleanor. We did not speak until the door slid open. It was a glass elevator, one of those exterior ones that slid down the side of the building. As we descended, I looked out at the plaza below. People were tiny dots rushing about their day, and there, walking toward the subway entrance, was a solitary figure in a gray suit. I watched Derek shrink. He became smaller and smaller as the elevator went down. Just a speck of dust in the grand scheme of the city. I put my hand against the cool glass. For 8 years, I had made myself small so he could feel big. I had dimmed my light so he could shine. I had thought that love meant compromise, even if the compromise was my own dignity. But as I watched him disappear into the crowd, a nobody in a city that no longer cared about him, I realized the truth. Power was not about screaming. It was not about throwing tables or renting gold chairs. Power was the ability to draw a line in the sand and say, no more. Power was the ability to walk away with your head high and your hands clean. The elevator reached the lobby with a soft chime. The doors opened. Like, Eleanor asked, checking her watch. Yes, I said, stepping out into the light. I know a place that serves excellent champagne, and this time I am buying. 6 months after the ink had dried on the restraining agreement, the Silver Tides Inn opened its doors. The reception was nothing short of spectacular. Architectural Digest featured our lobby on their cover, calling it a masterclass in coastal resurrection. Thanks to the success of the inn, Aurora's studio was catapulted from a local secret to a nationally recognized firm. We were invited to be the guests of honor at a massive industry gala in Seattle, celebrating the launch of a new luxury resort corridor that our project had essentially pioneered. The event was held at the Obsidian, a hotel so modern and sharp it looked like it could cut you. I arrived wearing a dress I had bought with my own money, a deep emerald silk that moved like water. Grayson was by my side, looking dashing in a tuxedo that he wore with a surprising amount of ease for a man who preferred flannel. Ready to be faded, Grayson asked as we handed our coats to the checkroom attendant. I am ready to eat the hors d'oeuvres, I joked. I heard they have lobster sliders. We walked toward the main ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition. As we neared the entrance, there was a small commotion near the audio booth. A microphone stand had tipped over, and the technician was scrambling to fix it before the keynote speeches began. I glanced over, feeling a vague ripple of sympathy for the worker. He was wearing a black staff uniform that was slightly too large for him, and he was sweating as he fiddled with the cords. His head bowed low to avoid making eye contact with the wealthy guests streaming past him. Then he turned his head to shout an instruction to a colleague, and the light from the crystal chandelier hit his face. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was Derek. He looked 10 years older than the man I had divorced. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was thinning and messy. His face was gaunt with deep lines etched around a mouth that was currently set in a grimace of frustration. He was not a guest. He was not an executive. He was a freelance event coordinator, the guy hired to take down cables and make sure the feedback did not ruin the speeches of men he used to consider his peers. Tesser Grayson asked, touching my elbow. Everything okay? I blinked, the image searing itself into my brain. The contrast was so sharp it almost hurt. Here was the man who had screamed that he was leveling up. Here was the man who had leased a Porsche to impress strangers. Now he was kneeling on a carpet, taping down a wire, terrified that someone important might see him. "I am fine," I said, turning away. "Just a ghost. Let us go inside." We were ushered into the VIP lounge, a private enclave separated from the main chaos by velvet ropes. Waiters circulated with trays of vintage champagne. Standing near the fireplace, holding a tumbler of amber liquid, was a familiar figure. Harold Doyle, the man whose drunken gossip had inadvertently saved my life, looked up and beamed when he saw me. "There she is," Harold boomed, putting his drink down to shake my hand with both of his. "The genius of Harbor Ridge. I drove past the inn last week. Tesser, it is magnificent. You managed to make a drafty old hotel feel like a warm hug. That is a rare talent. Thank you, Mr. Doyle," I said, smiling genuinely. "And thank you for the investment. We could not have done the landscaping without that final injection of capital. Best money I ever spent." Harold laughed. "I like betting on sure things, and you, my dear, are a sure thing." We were joined by two other investors, men with serious faces and deep pockets, who wanted to discuss the potential for a ski lodge concept in Aspen. The conversation was high-level, respectful, and stimulating. I was holding my own, discussing square footage and sustainable materials, feeling completely in my element. Then the door to the VIP lounge opened. "Excuse me," a voice said, breathless and hurried. "I have the updated run-of-show schedules for the speakers." Derek walked in. He was holding a stack of clipboards. He was looking down at the papers, rushing to distribute them before retreating to the shadows. He shoved a clipboard toward the first man he saw. "Here you go, sir. The timing for the toast is." Derek looked up. He froze. He was standing 3 feet away from me. He was standing 4 feet away from Harold Doyle. The color drained from his face with such violent speed that I thought he might faint. His eyes darted from my emerald dress to Harold's face and then down to his own cheap black staff uniform. The clipboards in his hands began to tremble, the papers rustling like dry leaves. It was the ballroom nightmare all over again. But this time, there was no wedding cake to hide behind. "Cole," Harold said, squinting at him. "Is that you?" Derek swallowed hard. Adam's apple bobbed. He tried to straighten his spine, tried to summon the ghost of the arrogant executive he used to be, but the disguise failed. "Mr. Doyle," Derek stammered, his voice thin. "I did not know you were attending. I'm just consulting on the logistics for this event, keeping busy. You know how it is." Harold looked him up and down, his expression unreadable. "Consulting, is that what they call it now?" Derek's eyes flicked to me. He saw the way I was standing, poised, calm, holding a glass of champagne, flanked by partners who respected me. Panic flared in his eyes. He realized that this story, the story of his fall and my rise, was visible to everyone in the room. He had to fix it. He had to spin it. "It is funny running into you both," Derek said, letting out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "I was just thinking about that wedding. What a night, right? I think the wine got the better of all of us. A lot of misunderstandings." He looked at Harold, pleading. "I know you heard some rumors that night, Harold, about trust funds and loans. You know how people exaggerate when they have had a few drinks. Tesser here is an artist. She does not really understand the complexities of liquidity and leverage. I was just trying to protect her from the stress of the market." The room went deadly silent. I watched him dig his own grave. He was trying to gaslight a room full of billionaires. He was trying to paint me as the naive little wife again, hoping that sexism would save him. Harold Doyle slowly lowered his glass to the table. The sound of the crystal hitting the wood was like a gavel strike. "Protect her," Harold repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Son, I do not rely on rumors. I rely on what I see, and what I saw that night was a man destroying a ballroom because he found out he could not spend his wife's money. That was not a misunderstanding. That was a character reveal." Derek flinched as if he had been slapped. "I have been in this business for 40 years, Harold continued, his eyes cold and hard. "I have seen markets crash and companies burn, but I have never seen a man implode quite as spectacularly as you did. I made a note that night, Cole. I told my partners, never give that man a dime. If he explodes because he missed out on a payday, he will fold the second the pressure is on. And looking at you now, it seems I made the right call." Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the other investors, but they were looking at him with a mixture of pity and disdain. He turned to me. "Tesser," he whispered, desperation leaking out of him. Tell them we were a team. Tell them I am good at what I do." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had forged my signature. I looked at the man who had broken my heart and then tried to steal my safety. I took a sip of my champagne. I set the glass down next to Harold's. "I cannot do that, Derek," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "We were never a team. You were a parasite, and I have spent the last year removing the infection." I stepped closer to him, crossing the boundary of polite distance. "Let me be clear. In front of witnesses, I said my assets are protected. My reputation is protected. And if I hear that you have used my name to secure so much as a library card, my lawyer will not just send a letter. She will finalize the paperwork she has been holding since our last meeting. Do you understand me?" Derek looked at me. He looked at Harold Doyle, who was nodding in agreement. He looked at the other men who had turned their backs on him to check their phones. He realized then that there was no spin left. There was no charm offensive that could fix this. The world he wanted to belong to, this world of velvet ropes and champagne, had rejected him, not because he was poor, but because he was small. "I understand," Derek whispered. He lowered his head. He turned around, clutching his clipboards to his chest like a shield. He walked out of the VIP room, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. He did not look back. He went back to the audio booth, back to the shadows, back to a life of taping down wires for people who would never know his name. I watched him go, and as the door closed behind him, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I did not even know was still there. It was the final tether. It had snapped. "Well," Harold said, breaking the silence. "That was awkward, but necessary. Now, Tesser, tell me about this ski lodge concept. Are we thinking of timber or stone?" "Both," I said, turning back to the group with a smile. "Definitely both." I stayed for another hour, but my heart was already elsewhere. I excused myself before the main speeches began, whispering to Grayson I needed some air. He squeezed my hand and told me he would meet me in the lobby. I walked out of the hotel and around to the back terrace. The parlor was situated right on the waterfront. The night air was cool and smelled of the sea, a different sea than the one at Harbor Ridge, but salt was salt. I walked down to the railing. The water was black and glossy, reflecting the lights of the city skyline. My phone buzzed. It was a video call from Meyer. I answered it. "Hey," Myers said. She was in her pajamas eating popcorn. "Did you wow them? Are you the queen of the ball?" I held the phone up, panning the camera to show the lights dancing on the water, then turned it back to my face. I knew I looked different than I had a year ago. I looked like a woman who owned her own skin. I saw him. "Meyer," I said. Meyer stopped chewing. "Derek, was he there?" "He was working the event," I said. "He was fixing the microphones." Meyer gasped. "No way. The universe really does have a sense of humor." "It does," I said. But it wasn't. It wasn't about revenge. I spoke to him. I shut him down. And then he walked away. And I felt nothing. Meyer, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No pity. Just done. Meyer smiled. A soft, genuine smile. "That is it, Tesser. That is the real victory. Indifference is the only true freedom." "I am free," I said. I looked out at the water one last time. Somewhere in that city behind me, Derek was coiling cables in the dark, but I was standing in the light. I had a flight to catch in the morning. I had a garden with water. I had a business to run. I hung up the phone and put it in my clutch. I turned my back on the water and walked toward the hotel entrance, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm on the pavement. I did not look back. I did not need to. My story was happening in front of me, and for the first time in a very long time, the page was blank and the pen was in my hand. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So, please leave a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to Azad Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a reminder that the best revenge is simply living well.